Cleaning really is all about the result. I have been in factories that are not following best practice with cleaning a positive displacement pump or a plate heat exchanger, but they're not having micro problems. They're not seeing micro problems in their product. Maybe they even have a QA step where at times they go swab test and look for bacteria. And that can happen a couple ways. I'll see factories that look for ATP, and if they find, they call it swabbing, so they'll swab test, look for ATP, that can tell them if there's bacteria present. And then there's also folks that will do cultures. They'll swab and try to grow a culture and see what's in that system. And if they're not getting problems, it doesn't matter if you're not following what I think of as best practice. If it works, it works. Some of these things come in as if you're designing a process from scratch, use best practice, then you're very likely to get to operating and not have problems, just never have had them in the first place. Or if you, which this happens all the time, we get calls from folks that are having some struggle with micro counts, or they've had some sort of biological problem, and they can chase it back down. A lot of times they're savvy enough to hunt down, hey, somewhere around this part of the process or this heat exchanger or that, around these pumps with cleaning problems, and then we can help them. You go into a lot of these plants that are moving towards valve clusters from transfer panels and starting to CIP, and you start talking to them about what's making you do this. Well, it's not just time to be more efficient. They're like, oh yeah, we had this operator that put the wrong thing on and did, they all have these horrible stories about the operator that disassembled something wrong and tore it up, or reassembled something wrong, or contaminated something, or dumped a whole bunch of product because of something they did. And so the automation of it fixes a lot of those problems. It turns out a well-designed system that's being CIP'd is repeatable. I mean, once you've established this process cleans, it cleans with these steps, and you check it periodically, you're probably good. The problem with these factories that are taking everything apart, like a meat plant, they get put together differently almost every time. They can have work instructions, they can have training. If they say, oh yeah, we put it together right every time, they're lying. They know that it's not. And the piping is beat up, taking it apart. You go in a process where they're COPing, and the piping looks like you've just handed a bunch of kindergartners hammers and turned them loose with it. I mean, it's just beat to death. Well, when you bang up the piping, those dents are also causing surface anomalies on the inside. There's just a great place for germs to hang up and micro to start hiding in the system. And they take pumps apart and they bang up pieces in it and damage the inside of the pumps, then it makes them more likely to not clean. If you have a new CIP system and you take good care of it from the beginning, it will probably be okay for a long time. If it's been neglected and already gotten to a, quote, tipping point, there really is a tipping point when you should just put a new one in. I get pulled into this conversation a lot as well. Someone that has a system that has really in reality hit the tipping point of needs to go away and be replaced, but maybe they want to reuse the tanks or want to reuse control systems, or they have an older system that isn't used that much and they want to, quote, rework it or refurbish it or something like that. And almost without fail, it ends up costing more time and money to rehab an old system than to build a new one. And I've fallen victim to it. I've been talked into it several times, and they, even said, yeah, I can see why you'd want to do that. Every single time I've regretted it. And you still end up with an old system that has some other problem that's going to reveal itself just a little bit later. An example of that, we had a CIP system that the folks were like, yeah, their tanks are in great shape. Let's just reuse the tanks. So we agreed to do it, and then it was not more than a year later and the tanks had a problem. Well, that problem was coming. The tanks were already 20 plus years old at that moment in time. They should have just been new tanks on the original CIP system.